Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the TST meeting on May 24th. Today, we've got one main topic, which is Zack is going to tell us about the Build and Package Brigade's plan to disaggregate the ONOS source repository and also leverage the Repo Tool to help the management of the multi-repository setup. So I'll pass the control over to Zack. And do you have slides, Zack? Or anything you want to show?
I can do a demo of how the tool works, but if that would work for people, or I can explain. So
whatever you want. I'll pass you the presentation rights, and if you want to show something, you're welcome to, or you can just talk to it.
Okay, can you see what I'm showing now?
Not yet. Yep, now we can.
Okay. So the way that the repo tool works is it lets you, instead of having one mono repo in Git, you can create multiple individual repos that each have their own history but can be checked out as a group and managed as a group. For example, if you do a release, your release ends up being cut from the from the repo manifest, which is a file that basically manages a bunch of branches that exist in Garrett, and it basically allows the tool to check out a large set of repositories at the same time. So the reason for my asking for access is to implement that tool and to implement on a per app basis each individual Git repo. I would need to go into Garrett and create those repos. So to give you an idea of how it works, I have a blank system here that has the repo tool installed. And so I'm going to make I'm going to initialize repo, which downloads the manifest from Garrett. Occasionally I get this if DNS fails. And then the sync up, which grabs copies of all the of every Git repo that would be on as part of the manifest. The manifest is a fairly simple file. In this case, I only have one Git repo set up in it right now because all this is doing is checking out the main ONOS repo. In a production environment, we have multiple, for example, we're using this also in Cord. And all these different Git repos are being checked out individually. There's also ability to group them and create various other organizational strategies in here. Once you've checked out or something with repo, it exists. All your normal Git commands work. So you'll see that you're not on a branch. That's one of the other things. You don't work in a branch when you're using repo. You work on a detached. And what you can do is you can start a thing. So I'm going to start a branch here. I'm on the TST example branch. I'm up to date. I'm going to edit that I'm going to throw away, but and you can see that I modified just the file. But then if I want to send it to Garrett, this isn't going to work because I'm not on a system where I have my credentials. But you do repo upload, and it would attempt to send it up to there, but it's going to fail because my my SSH credentials aren't on the demo system. Had it worked, what it would look like would be something like this. It'll send up the topic, it'll send up the branch that you're working off of, and various other project information. You can then download some specific things. For example, if I wanted to get this patch, I can very easily get a patch that I just downloaded. So you'll see that I'm on this other thing, but my change was that I added a file called testing file, and it's there. So it provides better interaction with Garrett. It provides a way to split up and disaggregate the code base. Those are the main two features that it offers. Did we have any questions?
I guess the other thing that I'd add is that maybe wasn't quite apparent from the demo is that it makes it easier to work across multiple repositories at the same time, right? So when you did repo branch, or sorry, repo start, but you can do that across multiple repositories to have the same branch across multiple repositories.
Right.
You can also do that across multiple repositories at the same time.
Over here in my cord repo, you'll see that I have a bunch of different checkouts, and it'll tell me which branch is in which repositories. And I can also upload them all as a set. We can't currently test them as a set. That doesn't really exist yet, but it's something worth thinking about doing. One of the other, from a testing perspective, you could put something in Jenkins to do individual acceptance testing on a repo. So, for example, if somebody had an app repo, you might require that before any other testing happens, that all the build process completes successfully on it. So those sorts of things would be things you could do with this.
Yeah.
So if the change set was touching multiple Git repositories, so it will generate multiple Git reviews.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
yes, it will.
They're still not atomically merged or anything like that, right? They're still separate views targeting different Git repositories. So, you know, you need to make sure that they can be merged independent of one another, right? Because they're not going to be merged exactly at the same time. But if you have, you know, a logical theme of changes that are touching multiple different repos, then you can manage them as one kind of change when you're working on your local machine.
So what you're saying is that, you know, if you make a change across repo dependencies, that basically, or if you introduce some, I mean, presumably there are going to be dependencies across multiple repos, but basically, if only part of it's accepted, then the build and the system might no longer work.
You have to be careful that you don't make changes like that.
Yeah.
So if you
the first two submissions are very careful.
Well, I guess the Jenkins verification would catch that, right? Say you added a new API in the ONOS core, and you tried to, at the same time, commit to change to an ONOS application that was in a different repository that used that API, then when you submitted it up to Garrett, it wouldn't yet be merged into the ONOS core, right? So the Jenkins verification would fail with you. that API wouldn't be there in the latest master code.
Oh. So what do you do with like mutual dependencies?
What do you mean?
Where either one can be merged independently without breaking the build?
Try and avoid that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, examine modules. Imagine module A and module B both call each other, right? And you change them both and change the interfaces simultaneously. You know, so you want to change the protocol
yeah.
which they communicate, right? And you need to change both modules, and they both mutually depend on each other, but you can't merge either one independently because it won't match the API, the previous API.
How frequently?
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
How frequently does a problem like that happen?
Whenever you have two independent modules that communicate.
Okay.
Yeah, like client server is a great example, right? Yeah. But also just, yeah, I guess a client server might just be a one-way dependency, but often you can have two-way dependencies where, yeah, you change the client interface and you also change the server interface. Or you change, if you change like a data type that's exchanged between two modules, for example, it will change the API on both sides.
Yeah, Copycat and Atomics are two separate projects, and this tends to happen a lot actually when you're going through any sort of moderate refactoring.
Have you come up with sort of mitigation tactics, Jordan, or is it just you kind of live with the pain for a short period of time?
Live with the pain for a short period of time, yeah. It gets sort of ugly. I mean, you just have to try to merge them close together. I mean, that's all I've come up with.
You're saying that basically you have to override and commit it even though verified failed in that case, and then you end up breaking the build until the other half is merged.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an issue. The other thing that can be an issue is if, depending on how your code base is structured, if there are, if for example you decide that the boundary of each Git repo isn't even across the entire, it isn't even in the directory structure. For example, I was asked by Mark to look at OpenRotom, and that is in the app of that is in apps OpenRotom, but there's a set of models and ONOS models for it. So figuring out things like that may be an organizational challenge. So there are ways in Repo to have multiple mounts or to create symlinks or other things across the data or across the checked out structure, but they're kind of, that's kind of a little bit of a hack to do, and I'll just say that it looks funny because you end up checking out one repo and it creates files in multiple places, which is sometimes not obvious. That said, the advantages of having things individually in their own repo and allowing development is
what did you say was the advantage of doing this?
The biggest advantage we found is for the acceptance testing and for just the way that the UI or the command line UI works with Garrett, handling patch branches, handling changes across, or changes that are specific to one part of the code without having to check out all of the code, or to be able to maintain patches that are focused in one area.
I guess I don't understand how that applies to ONOS, because with ONOS we have a single repository we have sort of all of our eggs in one basket, and so if we were to split it into multiple repositories, then that complexifies things, because all of a sudden we have to use repo now, and we have this problem of potentially mutual dependencies not working, and it's clear what the disadvantages are. Complexity, performance, reliability, and consistency are the main ones. So what I'm having trouble figuring out is what are the main upsides you see of doing this, and what benefit would it bring to the project?
the primary benefit is organizational. It means that each repo has its own history. Each repo can evolve as it needs to, and also just that it is the user interaction with Garrett that's been the big win.
Yeah.
Now, all those downsides are totally valid. And the thing about it is, part of the build brigade here was to explore its use. The reason I'm asking for this access is to explore its use, because I can't really do it unless I have the ability to create things on Garrett. None of the changes that I would end up making would adversely impact the ONOS code base. They'd just be extra repos that would be created on Garrett, and if you guys decide this isn't to your advantage, we can delete them and move on. But part of this was exploring that possibility.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if some people, like, say Zack starts to use Repo, that doesn't mean that everybody has to use Repo, right? Like, if people are just working on the one ONOS repository, they can still use the Git commands that they used to. That's right, Zack?
That is, unless we decide that you want to split out things that are in the existing ONOS repository and use Repo for those. For example, if you wanted to split all your apps out into their individual repos, that would be sort of a one-way thing. Having used Git review previously, Git review is a lot clunkier than using the repo command line tools. So that was a definite positive movement.
Yeah, I guess I could imagine use cases. For example, if we split applications out of ONOS, and I'm working across, usually you have a set of applications that you're working with. You can make a manifest file that lists out the ONOS core repository plus the set of applications that you're working with, and then you can download and manage those as kind of one set of applications.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to manage.
Okay, I guess, yeah.
So the goal, I don't think is, so I think the goal is not to take the ONOS core and say topologies, one repo, devices, another repo. Like the core or kernel, whatever you want to call that, stays as a repo.
Yeah.
Maybe we take the distributed systems piece out, kind of like Atomics and Copycat are already separate repos. We have a separate distributed platform. On top of that, we have the networking kernel, and then each of the drivers and the apps become their own repo. And then we'll host some of them, and then other people could host them on GitHub, or they could host them in their own private Git repositories, and people could just build manifests that make sense for the distribution they want to work with.
That's actually kind of interesting. So, yeah. So I guess the idea. So that's kind of interesting. I guess one thing. Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm trying to put my finger on it. But
I think one thing is that like different people are going to have different parts of the system that they're interested in working with.
Yeah.
So for example, I might want the ONOS core plus the Fabric app plus the VRouter app plus some things from Ford, the repository. But I don't care about like most of the other applications like vector reporting. I don't care about like the BGP provider or any of that stuff. Right? So,
yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. I mean, I think of like Linux kernel builds and they're very I don't know. Well, in order to remove all the drivers are in a single repo for better or for worse. But you can choose which ones you build. But choosing which ones you build is actually kind of complicated. And also, you invariably leave out one that you actually needed, and it breaks things too. So, I don't know, I mean, a potential advantage of splitting up ONOS, like you say, a technical potential advantage is, I guess, your Git repo is smaller and maybe updates faster. Maybe the history of that repo is more constrained to just changes to it, I guess, as you said. And maybe builds are faster too, I suppose, because you're only building at least your initial, although I guess your rebuilds are kind of fast anyway, but your initial build is certainly faster because you're only building the components you care about. And think of Linux build to think, oh my gosh, now it's building ArcNet, and that's and all these things that you don't need or want. And so I can see that might be an advantage. It also might give us, and then there's sort of kind of, I don't know, maybe more political or business reasons why you might want it as well, which is that applications are kind of, I don't know, or maybe it's a workflow thing. Applications are kind of independent of the ONOS core, which they kind of should be anyway. And maybe some libraries can sort of be factored out as well.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, maybe there's an advantage to, like, we don't have to worry about whether to put an application in the ONOS core or not. We just don't by default. And that decision's sort of automatically made.
Yeah, I think right now there's a lot of code just kind of around the periphery, right? Like, the providers, the drivers of the applications that most people don't care about, but some people do, right? Like, if you're using that particular use case, then you care about that code, but the rest of the people on the project don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of code that, I kind of look at and I'm like, why is this in ONOS? Like all the Yang stuff. And it'd be really great. It'd be really great to be able to, like, move that stuff into its own repo so that people who care about it could look at it and everyone else could ignore it. And also, I guess, it may simplify code reviews in some sense because, I mean, this is maybe a political reason, which is that basically you could give, I am writing my own special application and I would just own my own repo or whoever. And then
you could say for an app that's getting started, you give them +2, turn off verification, let them build code rapidly.
Which you could sort of do anyway with the modulator thing, but I guess the
thing is, it's tricky, right? Because people download the whole ONOS tree and they assume that there's kind of uniform quality across the code base. And so it's difficult to break into the ONOS code base with a new app because we don't relax the verification constraint for your new code.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
For a new app, you could say it's delinked. You could work on it, iterate it, and when you're ready to link it to, the core distribution, then you just add an entry to the manifest. And if you stop supporting your application, well, we just delete the entry from the manifest, and your code is still there. Yeah. People can still look at it. People can try to resurrect it or whatever.
It might also simplify, like, sort of more customized builds of ONOS as well. Yeah. Maybe where
because your manifest defines the workspace, which defines the package.
Another downside is this XML manifest thing. Whenever I see XML, it makes me unhappy. So that sucks.
As far as XML goes, it's pretty good. There's actually, I think I have a script somewhere around here that runs it through that validates it with a schema. So it's pretty hard to screw up with just a normal editor.
Yeah, it's just that, like, it seems that they, it's, at the end of the day, it's describing something very simple, and they've made a really complex format for it.
Repo comes out of...
Perhaps nicely machine readable, but not really good for humans. It's kind of a problem with XML. Some people like
Repo's from Android extraction, so probably enterprise-y Java-y. So it's not surprised that they decided to use XML in this case. One of the other things for your inclusion and exclusion of individual repos, there's a groups functionality, so you could possibly group things into like mainline or experimental and have people only check out. And for example, if somebody wants to add a new app, they would be stuck in experimental for quite a while until they've proven themselves.
Yeah, that kind of sounds like a good feature, actually, because as Brian just noted, the idea is, like, if you want something that maybe deserves to be part of the ONOS distribution but isn't ready for prime time, where does it go? Does it go into the main ONOS repo, or does it? The answer would be no. It gets its own repo. And we would
just provides a way to take those apps for people that want to do them and integrate into a workspace that is fully usable.
Yeah, and also, I guess it doesn't, in some sense, it doesn't like hold back like the release or the, I mean, I guess there seems to be this workflow potential advantage that right now, if I want to say I like React, I like reactive forwarding and I want to make it really good, code reviews basically go to, whoever, I don't know, maybe they may go to like lots of people. Basically, everybody who's concerned with ONOS core. Whereas maybe if it were in a separate repo, then just the people who cared about it would get those code reviewers and we could handle it independently without sort of like clogging the Git review pipeline. Maybe that's an advantage. But it seems like the main advantage is a way of splitting stuff out of our monolithic ONOS code base. That's kind of the goal. It's possible that there might be some technical and some sort of workflow and some political advantages to doing that. Technical meaning it's maybe more efficient to deal with less code, and sort of workflow meaning maybe the code reviews get routed to a smaller group of people. And political, we can sort of, apparently it's easier to distribute responsibility using this and admin powers versus the module owner system.
Well, yeah, so the module owner system enables just +2 and +2 on certain parts of the code base, whereas if you have separate repos, you have the full permission structure at your disposal. So you could delegate someone as an owner for a specific project who's capable of turning on push access or turning off verification or doing whatever they want.
That's kind of interesting. So you're saying that basically that if say I become an owner for
reactive forwarding.
Reactive forwarding, then I could basically potentially give people commit rights to that without messing with the rest of ONOS or having to talk to you or anybody and change the permission. So that might be, I guess, an administrative advantage.
You sort of have similar structure in ONOS app samples where those code relied on the latest master code, and someone breaks the API, no one maintains the app samples, and app samples state where it's not compatible for each kind of thing. So manage that kind of situation is sort of.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the problem of maintenance, and things die if they're not maintained, right? And so, I mean, that's what happened to ONOS app samples, that they basically bit rot and get broken with every new version of ONOS, and nobody fixes them, and that's the end of those apps. So, yeah, and the only way to fix it is to do a large amount of hard work that's currently not being done by anybody. It's kind of
Well, so I mean, one question, right, and this comes back to Jenkins Verification, is do you want Jenkins Verification to download everything and run a build against everything, but then you get into these mutual dependency problems?
That's a good question. I mean, so an advantage of the current system maybe is that apps that are in the ONOS core repo, if you make a change that breaks those apps, it doesn't get checked in. And so they tend to be more reliable and less likely to die because of that. Whereas ONOS app samples, ONOS evolves independently. So ONOS can do whatever it wants, break ONOS app samples, and that makes it bad for those apps. But looking at operating system distributions, I think you have the same sort of thing that new kernel versions or new library versions break apps, and it's up to the app maintainer to fix, or the distribution maintainer to fix them. And sometimes they just don't get fixed, and they just go away from and your favorite app just goes away from Ubuntu because nobody wanted to fix it to work with new kernel and libraries. But it sort of seems like the right thing to do if you look at how both platforms kind of work.
Yeah, the other thing is, if we're more diligent about API changes in support branches, then if you have a support branch for your application, it's likely to be more stable. And your app may be broken on master for a period of the release, but at some point, there are going to be jobs that try to build these apps, or the whole package is going to be we're going to try to assemble the entire package, and at that point, there are going to be failures that point at certain apps that are non-compliant.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, certainly, the distribution will get those things.
So the way to get into
so basically what I said was that hopefully the APIs and support branches remain more stable. So if apps repos also have support branches, that they're less likely to be broken over time. The ones on master could be more susceptible to API changes that break them, but when that happens, if we've got jobs that run periodically across the entire repo space, we'd be able to catch and identify the failing components, and those would either need to be fixed or ejected from the releases.
The way that versioning happens using repo is the manifest gets versioned, and then the manifest points to specific other branches in on Garrett. So it's easy to do or to backport, for example, fixes to an older version of a specific repo's the tree of a specific repo. So if somebody had breakage with, say, like a 2.0 version, but you guys are on 4.0, it's fairly easy to get that change back into that version. And that can be done sort of independently of whatever is in core. So that might be another advantage.
I think there's a risk of kind of balkanization with repo, which is that, you know, people can, you are sort of empowering people to make their own custom sort of, to basically pick and choose the components they use in a particularly mutually incompatible way. So for example, you know, say my application A requires, you know, ONOS version 2 and libraries version 3, or, you know, driver version 3, but application B requires ONOS version 3 and driver version 2. And so we have this, then we end up with this weird situation where, like, the applications, you know, require two different incompatible versions.
That doesn't really happen because the manifest controls and gives you the same set. If you cut a release, it'll be that release across every repo. What I was really speaking to is if you needed to do maintenance and patch something that broke. For example, if something changed in core and then one of the apps broke, then you could update that release's manifest across the entire across every included app. Does that make sense? It's less of a mix and match sort of thing and more of a way to make sure that every app you're getting is on the right branch or on the right version.
So you're saying I couldn't make a custom manifest that is full of in a bunch of random versions and that in a sort of different, in a sort of strange way, and, you know, have all my applications use different versions and different sets, and so that it wouldn't necessarily be possible to run them at the same time.
I'm sure you could, but I'm not sure why you'd want to. I don't think I'd recommend that as a deployment strategy.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's a good example, right, is that, you know, I use an older version of an API in one module, but I need a newer version of the API in the other module. And so I've created this new release of ONOS that doesn't correspond to any of the actual ONOS releases, because I needed a bug fix in a driver, for example, but I still use the old API from core that's been removed.
So I mean, I guess the way to think about it, right, is right now we release like an ONOS, you know, 1.10 or 1.9 or 1.8, right, across every module at the same time. And one of the things that this will do is it'll enable you to do releases on a per repo basis. So you could say that the distributed platform is on 2.0 or is on 3.0. I mean, this is the same way operating system distributions are built. And it probably doesn't make sense to have a semantic version-like version for ONOS. It probably makes sense to move to like a 16 or, you know, 1704, 1705 style date stamped version, which just is a collection of various components.
Oh, for the distribution.
For the distribution, yeah. And if you want to make your own custom distribution, you can select which of the components and what version they're going to be running on, right?
Yeah, I concur. But I still think semantic versioning for the components is probably...
For the components makes a lot of sense, because that's where, at a code level, the dependencies are.
Yeah. So I think, I guess, I don't know, to answer my question, it looks like, you can create chaos. People can just create weird releases that have all kinds of weird stuff. But on the other hand, that's core board may want to do that because.
Or yeah, I mean, a vendor that's going to support ONOS in their environment may want to do that as well, right? They may say, I want to include these applications, and we want to run this version, and you know, so our distribution is going to be something that looks a little bit different than the ONOS distribution.
I guess the question is, how unwieldy or how convenient is this if you want to create, you know, a full ONOS distribution that might now, instead of just having one component, you know, might have many hundreds of components.
Well, so ONOS today already has like 100 and something components, right? There's maybe like 160 or 180.
Oh, I guess I mean like, maybe components is the wrong way of describing it, but like, I guess, you know, Git repos, I might have 100 Git repos rather than just one. And
that's the main advantage of repo, is that it can manage and a huge set of repos and get you a consistent state out of them at the command line. Like with Android or something, they have, you know, maybe thousands. You might have thousands of repos in an Android release, and repos capable of handling that. Yes, and it also is capable of, for example, let's say there have been commits to 8 different repos and you have patches on 3 of them. You can tell it, I want you to rebase all of my commits on the head of all of these other all of these other repos, and it'll just go and do it for you without a whole lot of intervention. So it basically extends the monorepo style of interaction to a multiple repo set of, or multiple repo manifest.
Other questions?
Yeah, I guess it would be interesting to maybe try it with 1 or 2 sample apps or something like that, and just get an understanding of, like Bob said, how unwieldy or wieldy it is to kind of get your head around that kind of style of working with things. And to try and answer questions about how do we deal with mutual dependencies and stuff like that.
So, Zach, do you want to talk about sort of the next steps, or you know, first couple of repos you're planning on creating and/or porting over?
Sure. I still want to give a shot at Mark's open rotem because he asked for it. The next step would probably be to look at the apps directory, because looks like it's probably the lowest hanging fruit in terms of that. So if I could take suggestions as to what to separate out. That's where I would probably proceed. Would be to separate those sorts of things, or those apps out, and then see what else seems like it ought to be done. In all honesty, I'm not an ONOS expert. I'm much more of a tooling and build system expert, and that's why I was on the build and deploy brigade. So I definitely could use some guidance in that regard.
Okay.
I have a question. If I wanted to, say, check out the latest master of the whole repo, or all of the repos, and then build all of that, how many commands would that take?
So updating your set of repos is just repo sync, and it'll go and grab the manifest and check that you're on master or on whatever branch you're on. If you're on some other branch, it will tell you there are X more commits in master than are on yours, give you an opportunity to rebase. And then you just run whatever build system commands you'd run. So it's pretty much the same as git pull and then rebase. The number of commands is probably no different, or maybe different by 2 or 3 if you had a bunch of rebases you had to do, but that would be only if you were maintaining lots of patches and lots of different repos.
And then for building, would I have to move into the root of each of those repos.
That's a discussion of how your build system would work. If your build system already walks a set of directories, you could, for example, create groups in repo, only check out the groups you wanted, and then if your build system can walk the directories tree, for example, if you wanted to check out, let's say 10 apps instead of however many you have now, the build system would just have to know that it needs to navigate that directory tree to do that build. Repo doesn't really provide any build advantage or build system tools. It's just gets the code onto disk and then your build system takes over from there.
Yeah, so there would be a little bit of work involved in, because right now Buck has like kind of static pointers to all the apps and all the modules and stuff. So there would be a little bit of work probably around querying over the workspace to identify what targets are present in the entire workspace, and then building those targets in a more dynamic way. So there would be some work on the build system side. Alternatively, I mean, you could use different build tools or build frameworks in each of these different repos,
yeah.
And then tying them all together would be sort of outside of the scope of repo.
And if you don't really care about the latest version of the apps, you can just download the last version, for example, and that's easy to build it yourself.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how that like what, I guess you could build a manifest that would be against the tag instead of a branch. I'm not sure about that thing.
Oh yeah, so if we look at like, I sort of this raises a couple of questions. Like if we look at ONOS app samples, they're built with Maven, which sucks. But the good part of it is that they're built against a release version of ONOS, which I'm kind of into. And so I like the idea of saying, well, my app works on this version of ONOS, like a release version, not some like hash. Or I mean, it's nice to have both, right? If I have it that in fact I'm bleeding edge and I need to run on some hash against master that's been broken or whatever, then I can do that. But it's also nice to be able to specify, like for humans, a release tag. So I guess the question is that the case that can I, if we were to convert ONOS app samples to this, can we use a release tag rather than like or how is it specified? I guess I didn't look closely enough, but is it easy to build against a release version?
You can always specify when you do your repo checkout which manifest version you want. So you tell repo, I want this branch of the manifest, and then that manifest might contain, for example, if you add apps, they would appear in later versions of the manifest, and then they get checked out. I don't think it handles any of the tagging, but we haven't been using tagging over in Cord for a while, so I could see if it does. I think that it's mainly on branch and mainly on manifest branch that we've been using it. It may have tag support.
Is that for eCord? And mCord is that there was a stable version working.
It sounds like that may become clearer once ONOS app samples is ported to repo.
For number 2, can we just find that as the app? They like to decouple from 4. Well, some of the volunteers themselves.
Okay.
They go down if
Okay.
they could. Because the use cases, they want to be able to prioritize it on a stable version of ONOS.
Okay.
Yeah.
And release.
It seems that generally for applications, the idea of having them point to a release version of ONOS, so some stable version of ONOS is a good idea rather than tracking the master like we do now with all the applications.
Yeah.
In general,
Yeah.
but I mean, you may want to create an environment where you're on the bleeding edge of master because you depend on.
Yeah. If you depend on the bleeding edge, But I think, in general, most apps should just be built against a release version. I mean, any app that's essentially shipped should work against a release version.
Yeah.
And and maybe development versions depend on bleeding edge, but they can certainly support branches and should, ideally everything is work against a release version.
So risk I feel about going down, breaking apart this thing is that, so you sort of use the incentive trying to maintain a stable API kind of thing. If everything is chunked in the Git, if you wanted to break the API, it's going to be that guy's responsibility to fix all the things, so they'll try to at least come up with.
So I think even now, we still have a responsibility to maintain a stable API, right? If we were just remove an API, there could be any number of apps that don't overstay on equipment that are actually still built to go to the API. So even now, we don't have the freedom to do it along with the API.
That will go down much further than that. So
Yeah.
You have a less data point to check actually this API is unexpectedly public wasn't that. I mean, that was what happened in that conversation.
I think this can possibly be mitigated by testing. I mean, if we have jobs that would run, like if you make a change to core, it also tries to look at like stable manifest and pulls everything in, and then could at least report that, hey, you're gonna create these. Yeah. No, it's hard to actually, like, well, maybe you get permission to merge it, but then there's going to be some job that's continuously failing, and it'll be up to someone. Ideally, it's the person who's most incentivized, right? Is the guy who wants the changes, so he'll go in and make the changes across multiple things. But yeah, I don't know. Somehow we'll need to figure out how to be more disciplined about API changes.
So I have a question for people in the build brigade, like what are kind of alternatives, or what alternatives do you look at to like Repo? Are there other tools or other approaches? Obviously whatever Git sub-projects, I guess, are one, which not a very good one. Sub-modules are one, but it's not a very good one. Are there other alternatives, or what did you look at or consider?
I'm not aware of any that work to this extent, specifically with Garrett. Honestly, I haven't done a whole lot of exploration in that regard. Mainly because every time you introduce a new tool, you end up creating a burden on every user of that tool. And if there's going to be cross-developer use of the projects that we have going, it's better to stick to a common set. That said, there might be something way better out there that we're not aware of. So,
I guess I didn't entirely. I guess it only partially answered my question, which maybe is perhaps what you're driving at, which is like, is there a better alternative to Repo that that we didn't consider or aren't aware of, or is there a competitor to it that might be better, or something like that? And I guess the answer is we don't know because we haven't done the background research.
Well, I mean, I don't know that an extensive thing has been done, but I mean, Cord presumably did some degree of investigation, and I think Zach's answer was that Cord's using Repo, and so you've got a set of developers using Cord that are already familiar with the tool, and if there's some synergy between the tooling, between the projects. It makes it easier for developers to move between them and community members to learn one tool set.
Yeah, but I also think that ONOS should
use some modules. But
yeah. Well, I mean, you know, Cord may have made a bad decision, and we don't necessarily want ONOS. I mean, Cord's made lots of bad decisions, but that aside, we don't necessarily want ONOS to be, you know, if they made the wrong decision, we don't necessarily want to be bound by it. You know, maybe we would make the right decision and convince them to switch to a better tool or something like that. I mean, it seems that picking the right tool is a much more compelling argument than just do it because everybody else is doing it.
So one question. So Repo is tied to Garrett. Correct. So as long as the repo is Garrett managed by Garrett, then that's okay. That's the current situation.
Yeah, I don't know what happens if well, I mean most of Garrett is just Git with some magic, right? And so for downloading and syncing, I haven't tried this, but theoretically you should be able to put any Git repo server there.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
But no.
No. I think so. Yeah.
So for read-only stuff, you should be able to put whatever Git repo you want. Now the question is, for the pushing part, now it's going to make magic branches, refs for, refs drafts, refs whatever.
I mean,
which, like a GitHub or general Git repo would just say, what is this? So yeah, I don't know if there's support for the write portion using repo outside of Garrett.
One thing I just happen to do is that putting from Garrett is really slow, so I usually put from GitHub first, then think it. Then I was wondering if that kind of thing is possible with repo or not.
I think it might be. Maybe not as easily.
You can set multiple remotes in the manifest, but I haven't tried it. So I'm willing to bet that it will work, but it's not something that it's been tried. I'm not sure you'll get the richer interaction that repo has with Garrett. Obviously, you won't get that if you're not working with a remote that supports Garrett.
It's like Google tells me Git subtree is an alternative to repo. And it looks like there are a bunch of them actually.
Is it the same as Sandwich or not?
No, it's different.
No, it's different.
Yeah. It looks like there are a bunch of people who do a bunch of different alternatives.
Yeah, I remember when we started talking about this and Ali was talking about it, I did some amount of research on alternatives and tried a few of them. I wasn't particularly happy with any of the alternatives, and maybe it's just learning curve and doing it wrong.
So there's Subtree, Repo, Super Project, a bunch of them actually. But if we're convinced that Repo is the best one, or maybe we're just lazy and don't want to do any more work, and they have any.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of these little projects, and
Yeah.
you can get them in other places. Another one's GR, Git Repo Management. Cool. MRGR.
Yeah, I guess that's my sort of overall thing. Overall, I think I'm into splitting up the ONOS repo. It seems large and unwieldy. Splitting it up will perhaps have a bunch of advantages. It'd be nice to know the different pros and cons, the different methods, different alternatives.
Cool. Well, I mean, I think Zach's just going to work on maybe a few of these apps in a small context. We can gain a little bit of experience with the tool and see, when we have a little bit more concrete experience and data on the ONOS side. Well, I think that's the top of the hour. Thanks, Zach, for your presentation and discussion today.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you have any other questions, feel free to either email me or raise me on Slack. That's fine.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I guess that with that, that's the end of the meeting, and we'll see you guys next week.